We often view financial crises as uniquely modern phenomena, products of complex derivatives, algorithmic trading, or housing bubbles that only exist in the shadow of globalized capitalism. But beneath the veneer of ticker tapes and instantaneous transactions, the fundamental mechanics of collapse are timeless. They are rooted not in technology, but in human nature, the calculus of debt, and the fragility of trust. To truly understand the vulnerability of our current systems, we must travel back, far beyond the South Sea bubble, far beyond the Dutch tulip mania, to the very dawn of recorded civilization. We must look to the scorched plains of Mesopotamia, to the world's first cities, where the first great financial system was conceived. This is the story of the first documented financial crisis in human history, a collapse that occurred nearly 4,000 years ago during the height of the Third Dynasty of Ur, approximately 2100 to 2000 BC. The Sumerian economy of Ur III was not primitive. It was a highly centralized, bureaucratic, and sophisticated state-run system based almost entirely on credit. Imagine a world where the banks were the temples and the palaces, and the currency was not only silver, but also barley, the lifeblood of the civilization. Farmers, the backbone of the empire, relied on these institutions for seed loans, tools, and subsistence during the growing season. The promise was simple: repay the principal plus interest after the harvest. The interest rates were fixed and institutionalized, 33% for loans of barley and 20% for loans of silver. For a time, this system fueled unprecedented growth. It allowed for specialization, large-scale irrigation projects, and the complex administration of a vast empire. But built into the very structure of this success was a relentless mathematical spiral of compounding debt. Every year that passed, the debt load on the average Sumerian farmer grew, demanding increasingly larger yields just to break even. This entire edifice, this delicate balance of credit and expectation, was sustained by one critical assumption: the unwavering stability of the harvest. The credit system was a machine designed for good times, a machine that had no safety valve, no mechanism for systemic failure should the predictable rhythms of nature suddenly cease. And they did cease. The crisis we are about to explore is a profound lesson because it demonstrates that the core triggers of financial instability, generalized indebtedness, concentration of economic power, and the catastrophic failure of underlying productivity are constants, whether recorded on cuneiform tablets or calculated in milliseconds on Wall Street. If you are fascinated by the hidden connections between history and modern finance, consider subscribing. It helps us keep exploring these deep dives into human history. The Sumerians had invented credit, and in doing so, they had also invented the crash. Our journey begins not with speculation, but with survival, and the undeniable power of climate to shatter economic reality. The sophisticated credit system of Ur III was built on fertile soil, irrigated by the Tigris and Euphrates, but it was also built on sand. For centuries, the climate of the Middle East had supported this agricultural surplus, allowing the vast bureaucracy of the temples and the royal palace to function as central lenders and administrators. Yet, around 2200 BC, the region began to experience a profound and devastating shift. This period is known today in climate science as the 4.2 Ka BP event, a sudden, intense aridification and cooling period that dramatically altered precipitation patterns across large parts of the globe. In Mesopotamia, this translated directly into prolonged and severe droughts. The life-giving rivers diminished, and the intricate network of irrigation canals began to fail. Crucially, the long-term practice of intensive irrigation had an insidious side effect: salinization. As water evaporated in the heat, salt accumulated in the topsoil, slowly but inexorably poisoning the land. Archaeological evidence confirms the swift decline in productivity. Records show a forced shift from the high-yielding but salt-sensitive wheat to the more salt-tolerant but lower-yielding barley. Crop yields plummeted, sometimes by 50% or more, across the southern plains. This environmental shock was the catalyst, transforming a manageable debt system into a catastrophe. The farmers who had borrowed barley and silver based on the expectation of stable harvests suddenly found themselves with insufficient yield to feed their families, let alone meet the fixed interest rates of 33% and 20%. The debt spiral accelerated violently. Because the state and temple institutions were the creditors, they demanded collateral. And the only collateral most farmers possessed was their land and eventually their own labor, or the labor of their children. As the drought persisted, land tenure shifted massively. Independent farmers became tenant farmers, then debt slaves, falling into the social category of mushkenim. This concentration of economic distress was not merely a hardship, it was a systemic failure of the social contract, threatening the very stability of the empire. The economic structure, designed for prosperity, now acted as a massive engine of social stratification and instability. The mechanism of collapse was recorded with meticulous detail, thanks to the Sumerian penchant for record-keeping. Thousands of surviving cuneiform tablets, administrative, legal, and economic, provide a direct window into this escalating crisis. These tablets confirm the shift from credit-based prosperity to generalized insolvency, registering debts that were simply labeled as impossible to pay. When the debt became generalized, threatening mass starvation and revolt, the state recognized that the financial structure itself was the problem. This led to one of the most fascinating interventions in economic history, the institution of the clean slate decrees. Kings like Enmetena, Urukagina, and later rulers of Ur III periodically issued royal edicts known as amargi or andurarum. These were not bailouts in the modern sense. They were radical, unilateral cancellations of all agrarian debts owed to the palace and temple bureaucracy, and the immediate liberation of all debt slaves, including wives and children who had been pledged as servitude. These decrees were revolutionary. They recognized that when debt becomes too widespread, the entire system freezes, and the only way to restore productivity and social cohesion is to wipe the slate clean and restart the economy. However, these interventions were temporary patches, not structural solutions. As economic historian Michael Hudson has argued, the clean slate decrees were a desperate attempt to reset the clock, preserving the farming class, which was essential for tax collection and military service. But critically, the state did not cancel commercial debts between private merchants, nor did they lower the fundamental interest rates that drove the initial spiral. So while the amargi provided immediate relief, the structural flaws remained. As soon as the next set of loans was issued, the compounding debt clock began ticking again, exacerbated by the underlying climate deterioration. This cycle of debt accumulation, followed by royal cancellation, reveals an ancient understanding of systemic risk, but also the fundamental difficulty of addressing the root cause of financial instability. If you are finding this historical depth compelling, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you see parallels between these ancient debt cycles and modern economic pressures? How do we know all this with such certainty? This is not mere speculation, but a meticulous reconstruction based on converging lines of evidence. Our primary source is the vast archive of cuneiform tablets, hundreds of thousands of which document the daily economic transactions of the Ur III state, detailing everything from barley rations and silver loans to marriage contracts and land sales tied to debt. Scholars like Michael Hudson, Peter Stellenkeller, and Norman Yaffe have spent decades interpreting these administrative records, revealing the precise mechanisms of the Sumerian credit economy. The financial data from the tablets is corroborated by archaeological findings. Surveys of ancient Mesopotamian settlements show clear evidence of increasing salinization in the upper Tigris and Euphrates river valleys, correlating precisely with a documented decline in agricultural yields in the late 3rd millennium BC. Furthermore, this scientific data provides the external shock, proving that the crisis was triggered not by political folly alone, but by a catastrophic environmental failure that the economic system was inherently unable to absorb. The evidence is powerful, but it is important to acknowledge its limits. We rely on the records the centralized state chose to keep, meaning the perspective is often biased toward the palace and temple authorities. Nevertheless, the consistent pattern across legal and administrative texts, combined with environmental proof, allows us to reconstruct a narrative of structural collapse driven by debt and climate change, establishing the Ur III crisis as a foundational case study in financial history. The broader implications of the Sumerian collapse resonate far beyond the Mesopotamian plains. The failure of the Ur III economy around 2000 BC was not just a local event. It marked the end of the greatest administrative empire of its time. The widespread inability to pay debts, combined with the environmental devastation, led to massive internal displacement. Cities became depopulated, administrative capacity dissolved, and the central authority weakened critically. This internal chaos created the vulnerability that external forces exploited. The weakened empire, unable to muster the resources or the manpower due to internal financial and social fracture, eventually succumbed to invasions from the Amorites and the Elamites. The ultimate lesson here is that financial instability is rarely contained within the balance sheet. It translates directly into state capacity, military strength, and geopolitical vulnerability. The first financial crisis was simultaneously the first documented case of a great empire collapsing primarily due to internal economic fragility exacerbated by an external environmental shock. This ancient episode left enduring legacies. It cemented the concept of sovereign power over debt. The Amargi decrees established the precedent that the state, in times of extreme crisis, possesses the ultimate authority to intervene in private contracts and redefine economic reality. This is the ancient genesis of the idea of sovereign intervention, a concept that reappears in every major financial crisis, from the U.S. government's intervention in 2008 to the European Central Bank's actions during the Greek debt crisis. Moreover, the Sumerian experience highlights the hidden truth that economies can break not necessarily because of a lack of physical money, but because of a catastrophic loss of confidence and an unsustainable accumulation of non-performing loans, a concept that remains central to macroeconomics today. Despite the passage of 4 millennia, the core challenges and controversies surrounding financial crises remain strikingly similar to those faced by the Sumerian kings. One persistent myth is that ancient economies were too simple to suffer complex structural failures. The U3 evidence decisively refutes this, showing that even a commodity-based credit system, when subject to fixed interest rates and external shocks, generates the same relentless debt dynamics seen in modern fractional reserve banking. A key controversy revolves around the role of intervention. While the clean slate decrees offered necessary relief, they failed to address the systemic issue of rising salinization or the high fixed interest rates. This mirrors modern debates. Is a bailout or debt restructuring merely kicking the can down the road, or does it provide the necessary breathing room for structural reform? The Sumerian experience suggests that without addressing the underlying productivity limitations, in their case the dying soil, and in ours perhaps stagnant wage growth or technological disruption, debt cancellation is only a temporary analgesic. Consider the complexity of modern debt: student loans, mortgages, corporate leverage. What Sumer shows us is the universality of the mechanism. Credit creates growth, but compounding interest, when combined with an unexpected drop in productivity, be it climate failure, technological obsolescence, or market collapse, inevitably shifts assets from the producers to the creditors. What do you believe is the single greatest vulnerability of the modern financial system? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Sumerian crisis serves as a powerful cautionary tale, reminding us that the fundamental tension between creditor and debtor, between expectation and reality, is the engine of financial history. The story of Ur III is not merely a historical footnote. It is a foundational text in economic history. It reveals that the elements driving instability today, the reliance on perpetual growth, the corrosive effect of accumulating debt, the vulnerability to environmental shocks, and the political necessity of state intervention are constants of the human experience. From the collapse of Roman credit during the crisis of the 3rd century to the global depression of 1929, and the subprime meltdown of 2008, the same structural patterns repeat themselves. A system built on the promise of future productivity breaks when that productivity fails to materialize, or when the compounding debt outstrips the capacity to repay. By understanding the first financial crisis, we gain perspective on our own vulnerabilities. We learn that complexity does not change the core equation, only the speed and scale of the collapse. The Sumerians invented the ledger, the fixed interest rate, and the concept of systemic debt. In doing so, they bequeathed us a system of immense power, but also one carrying an inherent ancient flaw. The ultimate lesson from the dust of Mesopotamia is one of humility. Financial systems, regardless of their sophistication, are fundamentally fragile, dependent on ecological stability and public trust. To ignore the cyclical nature of debt and crisis is to invite the same fate that befell the great empire of Ur. The past does not merely rhyme, it dictates the rhythm of economic life. If you value these deep dives into the roots of modern civilization and economics, please remember to subscribe and join our community of thinkers. Your continued support ensures we can keep uncovering these vital, timeless lessons. We leave the arid fields of Mesopotamia, not with a sense of historical distance, but with a chilling recognition of proximity. The ghosts of Ur III are not confined to cuneiform fragments. They inhabit the spreadsheets and derivative markets of our own time. What the Sumerians demonstrated unequivocally is that the architecture of financial instability is rooted in constants: the human desire for credit, the unforgiving geometry of compounding interest, and the inevitable return of nature's volatility. 4 millennia separate us from the collapse of the Third Dynasty of Ur, yet the fundamental dilemma remains unchanged. How do we structure a system of growth based on future promises without allowing that promise to become an insurmountable burden? The sophisticated bureaucracy of Ur, designed for maximum efficiency, ultimately became the perfect mechanism for its own systemic failure when the crucial variable, stable productivity, was removed. The profound insight offered by the Amargi decrees is that debt, when generalized, ceases to be merely an economic obligation and becomes a political threat. The Sumerian kings understood that preserving the social fabric sometimes requires overriding the sanctity of contract. This ancient practice of sovereign relief is the shadow cast upon every modern financial crisis, from the restructuring of national debts to the massive quantitative easing programs designed to prevent total systemic seizure. We are perpetually engaged in the same debate. When does the mathematics of debt accumulation become so toxic that only an act of political will can reset the clock? The failure of Ur III was not that they used credit, but that they failed to institutionalize a sustainable exit strategy from the debt cycle, allowing the compounding burden to outpace the real economy's capacity to absorb it. Our modern financial world prides itself on its complexity and diversification, believing that intricate layers of instruments provide resilience. But the Sumerian narrative suggests that complexity merely serves to obscure the underlying vulnerability. Whether the shock is localized salinization or global climate change, whether the debt is recorded in barley or denominated in trillions of digital dollars, the result is the same: a sudden, radical divergence between expected returns and physical reality. The crisis of Ur reminds us that the true foundations of wealth are always physical: the capacity of the land, the reliability of energy, the health of the population.
When these physical anchors fail, no amount of financial engineering can sustain the illusion of infinite growth. The Sumerian experience forces us to look beyond the immediate market signals and confront the structural dependencies that truly govern our stability. To study the first financial crisis is to recognize that we are not pioneers in the realm of economic risk, but inheritors of ancient, unresolved tensions. The true practice of financial wisdom begins not with predicting the next bubble, but with understanding the timeless forces that create all bubbles, the failure to heed the warnings written in the historical ledger. The Sumerians left us not just records of their collapse, but a profound blueprint for structural fragility. Their fall is a silent, 4,000-year-old encouragement to institutionalize humility, to recognize the limits of our systems, and to build economies that prioritize resilience and equity over relentless, unsustainable expansion. The lesson etched into the clay of Mesopotamia is clear. Those who forget the oldest failures are doomed to repeat them, mistaking the ancient rhythm of collapse for a novel phenomenon. The imperative for sustained vigilance is eternal.